Zainab Okafor stumbled backward as the glass door swung shut just inches from her face. Her palm was still half raised, as if the words she had been speaking inside the boardroom could somehow follow her out and fix what just happened. They couldn't. Inside, laughter spilled through the cracked door. Not loud laughter. Worse, controlled laughter. The kind people use when they want you to know you're the joke but still want to pretend they're professional. She stood there frozen. Her presentation clicker was still in her hand. The screen behind the glass door still displayed her final slide: Global Brand Expansion Strategy, Voice and Identity Integration. Her voice replayed in her head. The moment it slipped, the way the rhythm of her Yoruba-inflected English came through on certain syllables, warm, unhurried, rooted in something older than the boardroom could hold. The way someone in the room tilted their head like they were listening to broken radio. Then the interruption. "Sorry. Could you repeat that again?" Followed by another voice, sharper. "I think we're losing the message here." And then the final blow. The senior executive, smiling politely like a knife wrapped in silk. "We may need someone more globally neutral to lead the presentation next time." Neutral. That word stayed behind her eyes like smoke. Zainab lowered her hand slowly. Inside her chest, something didn't just break. It folded inward like paper burned at the edges. She turned and walked away before anyone could see her breathe too hard. But she didn't walk far, because the hallway outside the boardroom was already occupied. Two junior staff stood near the water dispenser. One of them nudged the other the moment she appeared. Zainab didn't even need to hear the words. She already knew what they did with her accent when she wasn't in the room. Still, she heard it anyway. "Say it again," one of them whispered, poorly imitating her tone, stretching her vowels into a caricature of something she'd never actually said. "Global strat y." The other snorted. Zainab kept walking. Step, step, step. Each step felt like it belonged to someone else. By the time she reached the restroom, her reflection was already waiting for her like an accusation. She pushed the door open and stood there staring at herself. The woman in the mirror wore a pressed blazer, silver earrings shaped like crescent moons, her grandmother's design, handcrafted in Lagos, and eyes that had not yet decided whether to be angry or exhausted. "You're not stupid," she whispered quietly. But her reflection didn't answer back. Her phone vibrated. A message from HR. "Please submit revised notes of today's presentation. Also, moving forward, all client-facing presentations will be reassigned." Reassigned. Not corrected. Not improved. Reassigned. She laughed once. Short. Bitter. Almost silent. Then she gripped the sink so hard her knuckles went pale. "I worked for 3 months, she said to the empty restroom. 3 months. The fluorescent light above her flickered like it was thinking about agreeing. Outside, life continued like nothing happened. That was the worst part. Across the city, in a glass building that looked like it had been designed to intimidate clouds, Seo Junho sat in silence that had been medically ordered. Not metaphorically. Literally. "Voice rest," the doctor had said, switching between Korean and English with the practiced ease of someone who had grown up carrying both languages. "No speaking for at least 2 weeks. Possibly longer." 2 weeks sounded manageable when you said it quickly. But Junho was learning what silence really was. It wasn't quiet. It was pressure. His assistant entered cautiously. "대표님. The board is asking for updates on the launch presentation. They're concerned about your availability." Junho didn't respond. He picked up a pen and wrote on a notepad. "How many times do I have to become concerned before someone becomes useful?" The assistant swallowed. "We're exploring options. Voice actors. External presenters." Junho's pen stopped. He wrote one word. "No." The assistant hesitated. "There's also internal talent we could consider." That got his attention. Junho looked up slightly. The assistant continued carefully. "One of the junior staff. She has experience in linguistics and voice modulation. Zainab Okafor." The name meant nothing to him. But something about how the assistant said it, The slight pause before her name, like the assistant was expecting pushback, made him pause. Not confidence. Not praise. Just hesitation. Junho wrote, "Bring her file." Zainab didn't notice the email at first. She was still sitting in the restroom stall, staring at nothing, replaying everything. Then her phone vibrated again. Mandatory meeting with CEO's office. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Do not be late. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then she laughed again, but this time it wasn't bitter. It was confused. CEO, she whispered. Her brain immediately ran through possibilities. Mistake. Prank. HR punishment escalation. Or worse, termination disguised as meeting. She stood up slowly, washed her hands, and looked at herself again. You're not crying, she said firmly. But her eyes didn't agree. The next morning, she arrived 30 minutes early. The lobby of CO Global didn't feel like a workplace. It felt like a place where people went to forget they were small. The interior was all clean lines and dark wood. The aesthetic of Korean corporate minimalism pushed to its most expensive expression. A low arrangement of white orchids sat on the reception desk. A single framed calligraphy piece hung on the far wall. Zainab recognized none of the characters, but the brushwork had the weight of something chosen deliberately. Security scanned her badge twice. The elevator ride up felt longer than necessary, like the building was measuring her confidence and deciding it was insufficient. When the doors opened, she was greeted by silence again. Different kind this time. Controlled silence. Expensive silence. A woman in a fitted charcoal suit walked her down a corridor lined with glass walls. Junho Pernim doesn't do long conversations, she said. Zainab almost smiled. Neither do most people when I talk, she replied before she could stop herself. The woman glanced at her. A pause. Then, surprisingly, a small smirk. That might change today. They stopped in front of a door. Before Zainab could knock, it opened. And there he was. Seo Junho. Younger than she expected. Late 30s, maybe, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm but from years of choosing not to react. Dark circles under controlled eyes. A silver pen in hand, like it was part of him. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds, then gestured for her to come in. No handshake. No greeting. No annyeonghaseyo. Just observation. Zainab stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than anything she had heard all week. Junho pointed to a chair. She sat. He wrote something on a board in front of her. Speak. Zainab blinked. Excuse me. He tapped the board again. Speak normally. Her throat tightened. This is a test? He nodded once. So she spoke. Carefully at first. Then more naturally. Then she made the mistake of relaxing. Her accent came through. Soft but unmistakable. The rounded vowels. The unhurried cadence her mother had passed down the way you pass down a name. The room didn't react immediately. Junho just watched. Then he wrote. Again. She repeated. He listened closer this time. Then wrote. Don't change it. She frowned. Change what? He tapped the board. Nothing. That confused her more than laughter ever had. Before she could ask anything else, he pushed a printed document toward her. A script. Then he pointed to himself. And wrote. I can't speak. Zainab froze. For the first time that day, her problem stopped being the loudest thing in the room. Junho added. You will speak for me. She blinked slowly. I'm sorry. He didn't repeat it. He just watched her reaction. And for the first time in a long time, Zainab didn't feel like the joke. She felt like she had just been handed something dangerous. And valuable. And completely unreal. Junho wrote one final line. If you refuse, you walk out now. A pause. Then another line. If you accept, everything you think you know about your voice will change. Zainab stared at the paper. Then at him. Then back at the paper. And somewhere deep inside her humiliation, something else stirred. Not confidence. Not hope. Something sharper. Curiosity. She inhaled slowly. When do we start? Junho didn't smile, but he nodded. And for the first time since her world started collapsing, Zainab didn't feel invisible. She felt chosen. If you're still watching this, don't click away now, because this is where everything starts changing. And if you're enjoying this story so far, subscribe so you don't miss how far this goes. Because Zainab's voice is about to become something no one in that room is ready for. Zainab didn't sleep properly that night. Not because she was scared, because her brain refused to accept that the day had actually happened. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boardroom again. The laughter. The word neutral. At 2:13 a.m. she whispered, "This is either the biggest mistake of my life, or the only chance I've ever had." Then she laughed quietly. Or both. The next morning, she entered a sound studio instead of an office. Microphones, panels, screens, and a whiteboard in the corner still carrying faint traces of Korean script from whatever had happened in the room before her. A man in headphones looked at her like she was a tool. "So you're the voice girl." "I prefer my name," she said. He ignored it. "Sit." That annoyed her more than she expected. He pointed at the screen. "Read it." She did. He frowned. "To you." She blinked. "That's the point." Junho entered without warning. No greeting. Just presence. He wrote, "Try again." Then, "Still not it." Zainab snapped. "What do you want from me exactly?" He paused. Then wrote, "Truth without apology." That silenced the room. Because for the first time, someone wasn't trying to fix her voice. They were trying to understand it. And that was where everything changed. The technician leaned forward slightly. "Less emotion," he said flatly. "It weakens authority." Zainab blinked. "Emotion is literally how humans communicate," she replied. "Not in Korean corporate communication," he said. "Here, composure is authority." She turned toward Junho. "Is this what you want? A robot version of yourself?" Junho didn't answer immediately. Then he wrote, "I want to be understood." That answer stayed in the room longer than anyone else's voice. Zainab exhaled sharply. "Then let me speak like a human." The technician opened his mouth to argue again, but Junho raised a hand. One gesture. Enough. Then Junho erased something on his board and wrote, "Try her way." Silence. Even the technician froze. Zainab stepped forward again, slightly unsure now. But when she spoke this time, she didn't adjust herself. She didn't shrink. She didn't correct her accent. She simply spoke. Clear. Direct. Alive. When she finished, the room didn't respond immediately. No criticism. No laughter. Just stillness. Junho leaned back slowly. Then wrote, "Closer." Zainab frowned. "Closer to what?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then wrote one word. "Me." That single word changed something subtle in her expression. Not agreement. Not comfort. But recognition that this wasn't just training anymore. It was translation. Days turned into weeks. And slowly the studio stopped feeling like a test. It became repetition. Correction. Refinement. But not in the way she expected. Junho didn't try to erase her accent. He studied it. Noticed where emotion lived inside it. Where hesitation hid. Where confidence broke. She started noticing things in return. How he wrote certain words in Korean first before translating them, like some ideas refused to arrive in English without stopping in his native tongue first. How his pen slowed on the wording seam. Sincerity. He wrote it often. He rarely wrote its English equivalent. And in return, Zainab started hearing something inside him too. Even without voice. His pauses became predictable. His intentions clearer. Like she was learning a language nobody else bothered to understand. One afternoon, after a long session, she leaned back in the chair and said, "I think I hate your job." Without looking up, Junho wrote, "You are not required to like it." She smirked. "Good. Because I don't." Then she added after a pause, "But I think I'm getting good at it." That made Junho stop writing. He looked at her for a moment longer than usual, then wrote, "You are already better than good." Zainab blinked. That wasn't praise. Not exactly. But it landed heavier than praise. Because it sounded like truth. Outside the studio things shifted. Slowly at first. Then louder. Whispers inside the company. Then meetings without her. Then decisions about her that she was not invited to. She noticed the change one morning when she walked into the building. Reception didn't greet her. The elevator attendant didn't look at her. Even the security guard who used to nod quietly just scanned her badge and looked away. She felt it immediately. She was being removed without being removed. At lunch, she overheard two executives near the glass corridor. "She's temporary anyway. Once Junho Pernim stabilizes, we'll bring in a proper voice talent. Someone local. Someone local." Zainab stopped walking, just for a second, then kept moving. But something inside her didn't move with her. It stayed behind, heavy. That night, she arrived later than usual. Junho was already in the studio, waiting. He noticed her face immediately. He wrote, "What happened?" She didn't answer. He tried again. "What did they say?" Still silence. Then finally she spoke. "They said I'm temporary. That they want someone local." Junho stared at her. No reaction at first. Then he wrote slowly, "Everything they don't understand becomes temporary to them." Zainab let out a short laugh. But it wasn't humor. "That's not comforting." He nodded. Then wrote, "It wasn't meant to be." That honesty hit harder than sympathy ever could. She sat down slowly. "This whole thing," she said quietly, "feels like I'm borrowing someone else's life." Junho watched her. Then wrote, "You are not borrowing it." Pause. Then, "You are rebuilding it." Zainab looked at him. "And when they take it away?" The room went still. Junho didn't answer immediately. Then he wrote something different. Something heavier. "If they take it away, then it was never built properly." Zainab narrowed her eyes slightly. That's not very CEO-like optimism. For a second, something almost like a smile crossed Junho's face. Then he wrote, "나는 CEO로서 말하는 게 아니에요." He paused, then added the translation beneath it. "I am not speaking as a CEO." Pause. Then, "I am speaking as someone who lost his voice before." That changed the atmosphere completely. Because now it wasn't theory. It was personal. And because he had written those words first in Korean, as if the confession needed to be true in his own language before it could be true anywhere else, Zainab understood something she couldn't have put into words. Some things don't translate. They just resonate. The next escalation came without warning. A meeting notice. Mandatory review session with executive board. Zainab stared at the email, then laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. When she arrived at the studio, the technician wasn't there. Only Junho. And silence that felt sharper than usual. He wrote before she could speak, "They want to replace you." She didn't react immediately. Then, "I assumed." He added, "I rejected it." That made her pause. "You what?" He wrote again, "I rejected the board proposal." Zainab slowly sat down. "Why would you do that?" Junho looked at her longer than usual. Then wrote, "Because they are wrong." A pause. Then, "And because you are not replaceable in this system." That sentence hit differently. Not flattering. Not soft. Dangerous. Zainab stood up slowly. "Junho," she said carefully, "this is getting bigger than me." He nodded. Then wrote, "It was always bigger than you." That didn't reassure her. It tightened something in her chest. "So what happens when they push harder?" Junho didn't hesitate this time. He wrote, "Then we stop asking permission." Zainab frowned. That sounds like a bad idea in a company like this. He looked at her directly. Then wrote, "It is." And somehow that was the first time she believed him completely. The launch day arrived faster than expected. Too fast. Like the world had decided not to wait for them to feel ready. The venue was already full. Executives in the front rows. Media behind them. Investors scanning everything like it was a risk report. Zainab stood in the control room above the stage. Headset on. Hands steady but only just. The technician whispered, "You ready?" She looked at him. "I didn't get a choice," she said. Then after a beat, "So yes, I'm ready." Backstage, Junho stood alone. No pin today. Just stillness. The board members were there too, watching him carefully. One leaned in and spoke in rapid Korean, low and sharp.
이게 마지막 기회입니다. 승인된 발표자로 교체하세요.
This is your last chance. Replace her with the approved presenter. Junho didn't respond. Another added in English for emphasis. We've already prepared a replacement. Junho finally turned, looked at them, then held up a card, and wrote, "There is no replacement." Pause. Then, "This is my voice." He walked out. Applause began, then stopped when they realized something was wrong. He wasn't speaking. He stood at the podium in silence. Confusion spread immediately. Zainab's fingers tightened on the console. A signal came from backstage. Switch to backup voice. The technician hesitated. Zainab didn't. "No," she said. He turned. "What?" She repeated it. "No." Then she pushed the live channel open and spoke. Junho's voice filled the hall, but it was hers carrying it. "I want to speak honestly," he said through her. The room froze. "For years, I let other people define how I should sound." Whispers erupted immediately. A board member stood. "Cut it." Zainab didn't look away from the screen. "Don't," she said firmly. And it continued. "I lost my voice," Junho said, "and I let them replace it with something more acceptable." Silence. But acceptable is not the same as true. Phones came out. Recording started. This was no longer a launch. It was exposure. A board member rushed toward the control room. "Stop this immediately." Zainab turned slightly and said calmly, "No." He froze, because something about her tone had changed. It wasn't permission anymore. It was control. On stage, Junho finally lifted his head and said, "This is my voice." Pause. "And I choose who carries it." The room reacted instantly. Shock, confusion, then realization. Something had shifted publicly, irreversibly. After the event, chaos followed. Shouting behind the scenes. Executives panicking. Reputation teams scrambling. But Zainab walked slowly. Not rushed. Not afraid. Because something inside her had already settled. Junho met her outside. Neither spoke immediately. Then he wrote, "You didn't become my voice." Pause. "You became the reason I found it again." Zainab exhaled. A small laugh escaped her. "I thought I was just trying not to lose mine." Junho nodded. Then added, "You didn't." Pause. "You strengthened it." And for the first time, she believed that her voice didn't need permission to exist. The silence after the launch didn't feel like victory. It felt like impact. Like something had broken through a wall that was never meant to break. Zainab stood in the control room still wearing the headset, staring at the frozen screen replaying the last moments of the broadcast. Her breathing was steady, but her hands weren't. Below her, the hall was chaos. Voices everywhere. Raised arguments. Confused applause still dying out like it didn't know it was supposed to stop. Then the system cut to black. The technician leaned back slowly. That just happened. Zainab didn't respond. Because she already knew the truth. Something irreversible had just been done. Backstage was worse. Executives were shouting over each other. One of them pointed at the control room glass. "That wasn't approved." Another snapped back. "It's already live globally. Do you understand what that means?" It meant damage. It meant exposure. It meant they no longer controlled the narrative. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Junho stood still. Not reacting. Not defending. just watching everything fall into pieces he had already decided he no longer needed. When Zainab finally came down, people moved around her like she wasn't fully real yet. Like she might disappear if not acknowledged carefully. A junior staff member whispered as she passed. That was her voice. Another replied quietly. No, that was his. Zainab heard it, but didn't stop. Because now she understood something important. They still didn't know what she was. And that meant she had space to become something else. In a side corridor, Junho waited. No board members now. No technicians. Just him. When Zainab approached, he handed her the small card he always used. She looked at it before reading. It said, "They will come for both of us now." She exhaled slowly. "Let them," she said. Junho studied her for a moment, then wrote again. "You are not supposed to survive this system." Zainab tilted her head slightly. "Neither are you." A pause. Then unexpectedly Junho almost smiled again. Not fully, but enough. 3 days later the backlash began. First it was internal. Emergency board meetings. Emails marked urgent. Then it went public. Articles questioning the launch. Headlines about unauthorized messaging. Clips of the broadcast circulating everywhere. Some praising it. Some calling it reckless. All of them missing the point. Zainab didn't read most of it. She stopped after the third headline twisted her name into something unrecognizable. Because she realized something simple. People didn't argue with voices they respected. They only argued with voices they feared. CO Global, things were no longer stable. Meetings turned colder. Security became tighter. And Zainab noticed something else. She wasn't being ignored anymore. She was being watched. Carefully. Quietly. Like a decision was being made around her without her in the room. One evening, she was called into Junho's office. No assistants. No screen notes. Just him. He looked more tired than before. But clearer. Like something had settled internally even as everything outside collapsed. He wrote, "They are preparing to remove me." Zainab didn't react immediately. Then she said, "And me." Junho hesitated. Then wrote, "Yes." A pause. Then, "Together." That word landed heavier than expected. Zainab sat down slowly. So this was always going to end like this? Junho shook his head slightly. Then wrote, "No." Pause. "Not like this." Zainab leaned forward. "Then how?" Junho looked at her for a long moment. Then wrote something different. Something final. "It ends with who the audience believes." Silence. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. Because now it wasn't about voice anymore. It was about power. The next day the board made their move. A formal notice. Review of executive conduct and unauthorized representation. It wasn't subtle. It was removal dressed as procedure. Zainab read it once. Then placed it on the table. "So this is it," she said quietly. Junho nodded. But then added something unexpected. He wrote, "Unless we speak first." Zainab looked at him. "You mean go public again?" He nodded. "No approvals?" Another nod. Zainab let out a short breath. "You're either insane or finally honest." Junho didn't respond. Because he knew it was both. That night they prepared. Not like a company. Not like executives. Like people who had finally stopped asking permission to exist. Zainab sat in the studio alone first. Testing her voice. Not adjusting it. Not correcting it. Just speaking. Naturally. And for the first time she noticed something different. Her accent didn't feel like resistance anymore. It felt like ownership. She thought about her mother. The way she spoke on the phone to relatives back in Lagos. Fast, full, laughing loudly and without apology. The way she became more herself in Yoruba. The way she had always told Zainab, "Your voice is not a problem to be solved. It is a place you come from." Zainab had spent years trying to translate that place into something easier to receive. Tonight she stopped. Junho entered later. He wrote, "Tomorrow decides everything." Zainab nodded. "I know." A pause. Then she added, I just didn't expect to care this much. Junho looked at her. Then wrote, that is how they lose control of you. She smirked slightly. Too late. The next morning arrived too quickly. The building felt different again. Not tense this time. Final. Security wasn't joking anymore. People weren't lingering in hallways. Everything moved like a system preparing to reset itself. In the boardroom, they were already waiting. Executives, lawyers, decision makers, all seated like judgment had already been written. Junho walked in first. Zainab followed. No hesitation. No fear. Just presence. The lead board member spoke first. This situation has escalated beyond acceptable limits. Junho didn't respond. The man continued. You will be stepping down effective immediately. A pause. Then. And the individual assisting your communication strategy will also be terminated. All eyes shifted to Zainab. She didn't look away. She simply waited. Junho finally raised his hand. Not to interrupt. To signal. He pulled out the small card. And wrote. No. He placed it on the table. Then added another. You don't get to decide how this ends. The room stirred immediately. One executive leaned forward. This is not a performance. Zainab spoke for the first time. No, she said calmly. It's not. Silence. Because her voice carried differently now. Not uncertain. Not apologetic. Certain. Junho stepped forward slightly. Then looked at Zainab. A pause. And then he nodded. She understood. This was the moment. Zainab turned toward the board and spoke clearly. This company built its identity on control. A pause. And called it structure. Whispers. But she continued. You called difference a risk. Another pause. But difference is the only reason anyone listens. The room shifted. Uncomfortable now. Alert. Junho finally spoke. Through her. Not as translation. As alignment. I lost my voice, he said. And you decided that meant I lost authority. A pause. But I didn't lose it. He looked directly at them. I was just never heard correctly. The board member stood. This is over. Zainab turned slightly and said, no, just that. No explanation. No softness. And it stopped him. Junho stepped back slightly. And for the first time, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like someone reclaiming something stolen slowly over time. Zainab continued speaking. And from this moment, a pause. We stopped translating ourselves into something easier for you to understand. Silence. Heavy. Final. When they walked out of that room, nothing was resolved neatly. Nothing was wrapped up. But something had shifted permanently. Control had cracked. And through that crack, something louder than approval had begun to grow. Outside the building, Zainab stopped for the first time in hours. She looked at Junho. Now what? He thought for a moment. Then wrote. Now you stop becoming smaller. A pause. Then. And I start speaking again. Zainab asked. For real this time? He nodded. Then added. With my own voice. And for the first time since it all began, Zainab understood something she didn't before. She had not become someone else's voice. She had become someone who could never be silenced the same way again. The building didn't feel the same after that meeting. Not because anything visibly changed, but because something invisible had cracked. People moved differently now. Carefully. Like every hallway had started listening. Zainab noticed it the moment she stepped out of the boardroom. No one stopped her. No one joked. No one corrected her. They just watched. That was worse than laughter. Because laughter was noise. Watching was attention. And attention meant consequences were already forming somewhere she couldn't see. Junho walked beside her in silence. No card in his hand this time. Just his presence. They reached the elevator. The doors opened too quickly, like even the machine wanted them gone. Inside, Zainab finally spoke. They're going to remove you. Junho didn't look surprised. He nodded once. Then said quietly, I know. Zainab turned toward him. And you're okay with that? A pause. Junho answered honestly. No. Then added. But I am ready for it. That didn't comfort her. It made her chest tighten instead. When they reached the lower floor, security was already waiting. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just positioned. Strategic. One of them stepped forward. Seoda Pernim, the board has requested you remain on site pending final review. Junho nodded slightly. He expected it. Then looked at Zainab. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he handed her something small. A card. She looked at it before reading. It said, "Don't shrink for them." Zainab exhaled slowly. You're acting like this is goodbye. Junho didn't answer immediately. Then wrote, "It might be." That landed heavier than either of them expected. Zainab shook her head slightly. No, she said quietly. Not like this. Junho studied her face for a moment. Then wrote, "You didn't come here to be temporary." A pause. "You came here to be undeniable." That word stuck. Undeniable. Not accepted. Not tolerated. Undeniable. Before she could respond, a notification flashed on Junho's phone. Board emergency session. Immediate. Final. No delay. He read it once. Then looked up. They've made their decision. Zainab asked quietly. And mine? Junho hesitated. Then wrote, "You already made it." The next hour moved like pressure building in a sealed room. Junho was escorted upstairs. Zainab was not. But she didn't leave. She stayed in the lobby, watching, waiting, because something inside her refused to accept the ending they were trying to assign her. Upstairs, the boardroom was colder than before. The lead board member didn't waste time.
이것으로 검토를 마칩니다.
This concludes our review. He slid a document across the table in both languages, a performance of fairness. Termination of executive authority effective immediately. Junho looked at it. Didn't react. Not visibly. Then wrote, "Understood." A pause. Then added, "But you are missing one thing." The board member frowned. "And what is that?" Junho looked up. For the first time without hesitation. Then wrote, "The voice you tried to replace." Downstairs, Zainab suddenly straightened. Because her phone lit up. Live feed access granted. From Junho. She hesitated. Then pressed play. The boardroom camera came alive. Junho stood alone. Surrounded. But not smaller. Not anymore. He lifted a pen. And wrote where everyone could see. "You built this company on control." A pause. And called it structure. Silence. Even the board didn't interrupt yet. Zainab's breath slowed as she watched. Because this wasn't negotiation. It was exposure. Junho continued. "You removed voices that made you uncomfortable." He paused. Then wrote. And called it professionalism. A shift in the room. Unease. One board member leaned forward. "This is inappropriate." Junho didn't look at him. He wrote again. "What is inappropriate is silencing truth and calling it efficiency." That hit differently. Even from a screen. Even from a distance. Downstairs, Zainab whispered to herself, "You're really doing this." And for the first time she smiled. Not nervously. Not uncertainly. But like something had finally aligned. Back upstairs, the lead board member stood. "This ends now." Junho looked at him. Then wrote, "No. Just that. One word. Heavy enough to stop movement in the room." Then he did something unexpected. He turned slightly toward the camera feed, as if addressing something beyond the room, beyond the building, beyond approval, and wrote, "This is not my voice being restored." A pause. "This is my voice being returned." Zainab's hand tightened around her phone, because she understood now. He wasn't speaking to the board anymore. He was speaking to everyone who had ever been corrected into silence. The board tried one last time. "Security will remove you." Junho nodded. Then wrote, "They already tried." A pause. "And failed." Downstairs, footsteps approached. Security moving. Zainab stood slowly, because she knew what came next wasn't negotiation anymore. It was ending. But instead of fear, something steadier settled inside her. Clarity. She walked toward the elevator, pressed the button, and whispered, "Let's finish this properly." When she entered the boardroom minutes later, no one expected her. That was clear from their faces. Even Junho turned slightly, surprised, but not stopping her. She stepped forward, and for a moment the room didn't know where to place her. Not staff, not guest, not voice, something else. The lead board member frowned. "You are not authorized to be here." Zainab looked at him, then spoke calmly. "I wasn't authorized to speak either." A pause. "But I did anyway." Silence. Because there was no procedural response for that. Junho looked at her, then nodded slightly. Zainab turned to the room and spoke fully now, not as someone asking, not as someone proving, but as someone done explaining. "You didn't lose control of this company today." A pause. "You lost control of the narrative a long time ago." She stepped closer. "And you just didn't notice." The room shifted. Uncomfortable. Exposed. Junho added quietly, "Because you were listening for compliance." A pause. "Not truth." Zainab looked at him for a brief moment, then back at the board. "And truth doesn't ask permission to exist." That line landed hard. Even the silence changed after it. Minutes later, security hesitated, because no one had given them a clear instruction anymore. That hesitation was enough. Zainab didn't resist when Junho was escorted out. She just walked beside him. Not behind. Not following. Beside. Outside the building, the air felt different. Not free. Not finished. But open. Like something had ended without fully closing. Zainab finally exhaled properly. "So what now?" she asked. Junho looked at her. Then wrote, "Now I rebuild what I lost." A pause. "And you build what they tried to erase?" Zainab asked. "And what is that?" Junho didn't hesitate. He wrote, "Your voice. Unfiltered." Zainab looked forward. At the city. At everything that had existed before this moment. Then said quietly, "They really thought silence was safer." Junho nodded. Then wrote, "It never is." And for the first time since the beginning of everything, Zainab wasn't trying to be heard. She already was. The days after felt like walking through aftermath. Not chaos anymore. Not noise. Just consequences settling into place slowly, like dust refusing to disappear. Zainab noticed it first in the news. Clips of the launch resurfacing everywhere. Not edited. Not controlled. Just raw. Junho's silence on stage. Her voice carrying through him. The moment the board tried to cut it. The moment it didn't stop. People were arguing about it online in a way she didn't expect. Not about whether it was right, but about why it felt so real. Someone in Seoul wrote, "그녀의 목소리가 그를 대변한 게 아니었다."
그를 해방시켰다.
Her voice didn't represent him. Freed him. Someone in Lagos replied with just, "First she avoided reading too much. But silence at home felt heavier than noise outside. So she read anyway." Some called it a scandal. Some called it genius. Some called it dangerous. But one comment stayed longer than the rest. She didn't change his voice. She revealed it. Zainab stared at that sentence for a long time, then closed her phone. Because something about being understood publicly still felt unfamiliar. Junho didn't disappear. But he also didn't return to how things used to be. He wasn't CEO in the same way anymore. Not formally removed. Not fully present. Somewhere in between. A transition no one had a name for yet. Zainab met him again 3 days later. Not in an office. Not in a boardroom. But outside the building. Same glass tower. Different energy. He was waiting by the steps. No pen this time. No cards. Just hands in his pockets. When she approached, he nodded slightly. No performance. No structure. Just acknowledgement. Zainab looked at him. You've become hard to find. He gave a faint exhale that almost counted as a laugh, then replied quietly, I stopped staying where I was assigned. She nodded slowly. That sounds expensive. A pause. Then she added, emotionally, I mean. Junho tilted his head slightly, then answered honestly, it is. They stood there for a moment. Not rushed. Not forced. Just present. For the first time, neither of them had an audience. That changed the tone completely. Zainab finally spoke. So what happens now? With them? Junho looked at the building behind him, then said, they will rebuild it. She frowned slightly. And us? A pause. Junho didn't answer immediately, then said, we are not part of their rebuild. That landed softly, but firmly. Zainab nodded. I figured. Then after a pause, I don't think I can go back to being corrected into silence. Junho looked at her carefully, then replied, good. A pause. Because they would have tried again. A breeze passed between them. Small moment. But it felt like transition. Zainab shifted her weight slightly. I keep thinking about that first day. Junho waited. She continued, when you wrote Speak, I thought it was a test. A small pause. But it wasn't. Junho shook his head once. Then wrote, it was recognition. Zainab exhaled slowly. And now? Junho looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, now it becomes yours fully. She blinked. What does that mean? He hesitated, then answered, no more translating me. A pause. No more speaking for me. Zainab frowned slightly. You're leaving it? Junho nodded. Not regretfully. Not emotionally. Just decisively. I don't need a voice anymore. He wrote. Then added, I needed understanding. A pause. And I already got that. Zainab looked at him differently now. Like something was shifting in her perception of everything they had built. So what am I then? Junho didn't answer immediately. Then wrote, you are what remains when people stop asking you to shrink. That sentence stayed between them. Longer than silence. For the first time, Zainab smiled properly. Not because something was funny, but because something finally made sense. Over the following weeks, things changed quietly. Not dramatic headlines. Not public statements. Just absence of correction. She stopped being reassigned. Stopped being monitored. Stopped being edited. And instead, she was asked. Her first independent consulting request came from outside the company. A startup in Busan of all places. Young founders building a global communications platform, tired of sounding like every other Korean tech brand. They didn't ask for her accent to be neutralized. They asked for it to be understood. That alone felt strange. And right. When she told Junho, he just nodded. No surprise. No pride. Just acceptance. Then wrote, you were never the exception. A pause. You were the beginning. Zainab laughed lightly at that. You say things like that now and it sounds like a prophecy. Junho replied, it is just observation. One evening, she stood alone again outside the glass building. But this time it didn't feel like the place that broke her. Felt like the place she outgrew. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Just one line. Thank you for not changing how you sound. She stared at it for a moment, then smiled faintly, and didn't reply. Because for once, she didn't need to explain herself back into existence. Later that night, she recorded something. No script. No correction. No approval. Just her voice. Unfiltered. And when she finished, she didn't listen back immediately. She just sat there. Quiet. Present. Because now she understood something she didn't before. Her voice was never the problem. The world just wasn't used to hearing it without permission. And somewhere far away, Junho sat in silence again. But this time it wasn't imposed. It was chosen. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like absence. Felt like clarity. If this story moved you, if you've ever been told your voice was too much, or not enough, or simply the wrong kind of real, subscribe. Leave a comment below telling me, whose voice do you carry? And whose voice carries you?